One of the fundamental things to make your renders, which inherently looks fake because it's made in 3D software, one of the things you can do to make it look real is adding film grain. What you might do is download some grain, you might even pay for it and overlay it. But it turns out there's a well-known trick, might be kind of old, but there's a trick to do this directly in the compositor and procedurally. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Are we talking about it now? No, we're gonna talk about it in a bit. You can either put grain over a render that you do, or you can put this over actual footage that's pre-rendered. It doesn't matter. I'm just gonna use footage. Here I have some footage. It plays. If you see any kind of noise, really it's just because I rendered this at a low sample count. Really, this should be a perfectly clean render. It inherently looks fake because every surface is too perfect and there's no like texture to it. Speaking of texture, there's a texture node in compositing nodes. In fact, any texture you make in here can be edited in the texture workspace and then brought into here. So what I mean is I go to my grain texture. Let's just go to noise to start off with. And you can see it's now in our compositor. In fact, if you do noise, it has the property. Every single frame, it's going to update, just like real noise. Of course, this noise isn't really high quality, just kind of looks like TV static, but the point still stands. You can take this grain and mix it on top. So I'm just going to throw my grain over here, and people either do multiply or even better, I would recommend doing overlay. You take that, you make it a bit softer, hopefully it gets through YouTube compression. You have very subtle grain on top of your footage. Now, this looks really shitty because there is kind of a nice pattern to grain, and traditionally this comes from silver, halide, film, nerd stuff. This just looks like we put static on top of it. So I'm going to use distorted noise. That's going to look like this. Of course, that's way too big. So before I scale it down, take your noise basis and change it to anything, just a more interesting pattern. I'm going to use improved Perlin and then take the size and make it like 0.01. You're going to see this is a bit vertically or horizontally stretched. You can compensate for that by doing stretching on the x-axis. The magic number is your aspect ratio. So in my case, it's a 1080p, 1920 divided by 1080. So now I make it tiny. I do the overlay, and this is going to be much kind of higher quality noise. Although there's now the issue that if I go frame by frame, there's going to be no updating. This is unlike noise, which did it for us. And it's kind of an issue because there's no way to do it in here. It turns out though, there is a workaround to this. So because this is a procedural texture that I can scale and it will just stretch to infinity, so too can I move this texture. So you can see I'm translating it on the x-axis. If I do big jumps, 1, 2, 3, it's effectively going to look like a different frame each time without any sliding. Hashtag for expression driver, type in frame. And this is now going to kind of make the frame number our seed for each one. You can see we have this nice film grain. So here's before and after. Hopefully YouTube doesn't like eat this alive. And don't forget, you have control over the noise. So I'm just going to make it a smidge smaller and a bit more visible and zoom in here for YouTube purposes. Now we have a nice kind of updating grain over here. And this is one of the tricks you can do to add realism to any scene. Now, I do want to mention, you don't need to do this with pre-existing footage. You can actually do this directly in a render. If I render my scene, which right now is a cube, and then we have noise, which I'm going to overlay to much stronger so you can see it. Now we have this updating to our render, which works if you have an animated render. So you can just make this a node network that you can slap onto your compositing. In fact, I did this for you and added a bunch of stuff like gate weave, gate flicker, vignetting, lens things. This is just taking it a step further, like 15% more realism. You didn't watch this tutorial to be sold to, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. This video is sponsored by our good friends over at Squarespace. This is a service I legitimately use to make my website, www.cgmatter.com. We have our layout where you literally just drag around squares or blocks. And if you want it even easier than that, Squarespace has like this integrated AI design thing. Will get you either all the way there or 90% of the way there. And then there's other features too, like a payment system integrated into Squarespace. In fact, my website has a like subscription-based thing, kind of like Patreon. And then lastly, for that website, I use the asset browser directly in Squarespace to store all my files. So if this sounds good to you, head over to squarespace.com. You can literally just design your website. And when you're ready to take that thing and launch, link in the description to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.